All right, but let's start with this. We've got some breaking news for you out of Washington. President Trump, moments ago, says the August 1st deadline stands strong and will not be extended. In his words, it's a big day for America. Now, this proclamation follows President Trump suggesting there might be an extension of this deadline for countries like China. And it's all happening with the backdrop of new GDP numbers, which are out today, as well as an interest rate decision, which is coming up this afternoon. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins us now from the New York Stock Exchange to talk about that. Kelly, great to see you. So let's start with the fresh information here. President Trump insisting the August 1st deadline is for real. How have markets been reacting to his deadlines or I should say changing deadlines in the weeks past, and how are they likely to see this?
So right now, markets are pretty much flat, but that's also because we have so much economic and business data ahead. We've also got earnings for some major tech companies coming out after the bell. So investors are essentially balancing a overload of information today. And so it's going to be hard to tell what specifically moves the market. That being said, I did speak to a few investors here this morning before trading started, and I asked about that August 1st deadline. And the response was, we've been here before. We've seen these deadlines change, and we're in a different spot than we were going back to April because there are a number of trade deals or frameworks of deals that give more clarity. It does mean that there are going to be higher tariffs, and businesses are going to have to navigate that. This earnings season, we have heard a number of companies come out and say they are taking a hit to their bottom line. Stanley Black & Decker was sort of the latest domino to drop, a multiple $100 million hit because of tariffs. But generally, the markets right now have gotten used to the back and forth, and they've seen this August 1st deadline coming. I think the wild card could be, we saw the tariff with India go to 25%, as well as an undisclosed penalty for doing business with Russia. For me, the wild card is what that means in terms of a penalty for countries like China that do business with Russia, Errol.
And we should keep in mind, Kelly, you were reporting earlier this year that many businesses in anticipation of tariffs were stocking up on supplies as much as they could. And it's why we're seeing a difference between Q1 and Q2 GDP numbers. We've just got the Q2 numbers out. GDP grew last quarter, but put that number in context for the bigger picture.
Okay, so two things to remember about GDP. It is a backward-looking number. So second quarter GDP, this looks at how the U.S. economy grew from April to June. This is also the first of three estimates that we're going to get, so this number could change. But it was a good number. We grew in the second quarter 3% in comparison to negative growth in the first quarter. But you mentioned that front running of goods, and that's exactly why we see this big difference. In the first quarter, a bunch of companies brought in those goods ahead of the deadline. You had a very big import number. How you calculate GDP when you have a big import number, that sort of counts against your GDP. This quarter, or this most recent quarter, we saw a plunge in imports. And so that's really helping boost that overall headline number with a significant amount of growth there. What I will say, though, is there's a lot of noise because of tariffs, imports, one quarter versus down the next. The third quarter is really going to give us a sense of how businesses are settling into this new trade policy.
And speaking of Q3, we have a decision this afternoon with Fed Chairman Powell set to announce the bank's latest decision on interest rates. I believe you've been telling us the expectation is it holds steady, but boy, is he under pressure from the president and the White House over lowering them. What should we expect, and at what time do we find out more?
Definitely a lot of pressure from the White House, but remember, the Federal Reserve is supposed to remain independent. Right now, the market is pricing in a 97% chance we are going to see no change in interest rates. That decision will come out at 2 p.m. The main thing to watch, though, is 2:30 p.m. That is when Chair Powell will give remarks and take questions from reporters, and he will be pressed on all of that pressure, as well as when we might see interest rate cuts in the future, Errol.
All right, awesome. Kelly O'Grady making us feel smarter. Thanks so much. Great to see you. We'll see you again soon. All right, let's jump over now to CBS News correspondent Natalie Brand. She's at the White House for us and can give us more on the latest statements from the president as it relates to trade. Natalie, good morning again. The president, I guess, doubling down on his Friday deadline of August 1st, perhaps in reaction to commentary that his deadlines don't carry any weight. What is the president saying? How's it being interpreted?
Good morning, Errol. Well, the administration in recent weeks has really been consistent in talking about and sticking to this August 1st deadline. And we are seeing, as we approach that Friday deadline, some new announcements. One by the president, referenced by Kelly on India in a lengthy social media post just this morning. He cites military equipment purchased from Russia, also Russia's largest buyer of energy, and says that because of that and some other things, that India will be paying a tariff of 25% plus a penalty for the above. This is a country that, as you may remember, Vice President J.D. Vance visited months ago. They were talking about trade back then. We had been waiting to kind of hear about movement on India. Well, now we have some answers, and obviously the connection to Russia as well. Economic advisor Kevin Hassett was just asked about this news by reporters here at the White House. Here's what he had to say.
Right. Well, I think that what's going to happen is that India is going to cut their prices to the U.S. In order to maintain their market share. That's what everybody else has been doing. And then they might reconsider their practices, which have led to this higher rate. And over time, I would guess the Indian firms will be onshoring production in the U.S. and Indians might even open their markets more to us so that we reconsider a future trade deal. So over here, anytime.
So in those comments, he's signaling that the U.S. The administration is open to negotiation there. But of course, again, as we barrel towards this deadline, the big question that remains, what happens with Canada and Mexico, where talks appear to have stalled. And of course, as Kelly noted, also China, where, as we know, talks for an extension of the tariff truce have been underway this week.
Yeah, and we also want to hear from India for its reaction to this development. Natalie, I also want to ask you about new developments coming directly from the president's mouth as it relates to his relationship with convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. He doesn't want any more attention on this, but he's just given the topic new life by sharing new details. What is he saying?
Yeah, he was pressed by reporters traveling with him back from Scotland about comments he made that Epstein poached employees from his Mar-a-Lago club in Florida, and that, was a reason for their falling out, the reason that he eventually banned Epstein from the club. And in questioning with reporters, he was asked, well, who were these employees? Were they young women? He acknowledged that they were young women in the spa. He was asked specifically about Virginia Giuffre. Here's what he had to say.
I think she worked at the spa. I think so. I think that was one of the people. Yeah. He stole her.
Now, Giuffre, as you know, emerged as one of Epstein's most vocal public sex trafficking accusers. Sadly, she died by suicide, according to her family. But she says Ghislaine Maxwell is the one who approached her when she was just 16 back in 2000. That is her allegation. Maxwell denies that. But of course, Maxwell is serving a 20-year prison sentence convicted of sex trafficking, Errol.
Yeah, and as you've discussed this week, Natalie, the president has not ruled out pardoning Maxwell. So a fascinating development. Thank you so much, Natalie Brand at the White House.